Good morning. In this segment of our journey toward becoming His beloved, answering God's call to discipleship, through our study of the Bible from Genesis through Revelation, we come to a point where very important basic things are happening that have deep ramifications for our own faith. We are at the place where the Israelites have been delivered from Egypt. They have gone through the famous Red Sea crossing, during which time, not by any power of their own, the parting of the waters and then the drowning of all of Pharaoh's army, we have a people who are beginning their journey to Mount Sinai, which, as we discussed in the last segment, is in the opposite direction from the Promised Land. So what is God doing, and what can we find out about God from these events? Well, God is becoming a teacher, a profoundly successful teacher. And we have instant after instant, not only in the next month and a half that it's going to take them to get from the Red Sea down to Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula. We have a situation where it introduces the idea that every event that follows all of this series of events have the same sorts of foundational and historic ramifications. For example, as they start the journey, they know very little about God. They don't even know much about Moses. He's only been their leader for a few months, maybe up to a year. I would dare say that since there were between 1 and 2 million of these people, at this point, there were many who have never really actually seen Moses, because the distances involved with this number of people and livestock were simply too great. The Lord is beginning to teach them. And as we look at what happens and what God does, we can draw a very striking conclusion. God is teaching them basically in each instance like they were the very smallest grammar school children. One event, one point. Another event, reiteration of that point. Another event, reiteration of that point yet again. Why? For it to sink in, so that these people can, as God wants them to do, be formed into a nation. They are most certainly not a nation at this point. The journey from the Red Sea crossing to Mount Sinai took approximately 2 months to accomplish. During that time, we can see from the patterns of what occurred that God is teaching and forming the Israelites on 2 levels. First, He is forming them spiritually into a people of faith in Him. They are not a spiritual people at this point, and the Bible belabors that point so that we understand clearly these are not spiritual people. They have no history of spirituality as you and I would now identify it. He is also at the same time using little events and great events to physically develop them into what will become the nation of Israelites, who were then able to take over the promised land, which is Canaan, which is the modern day Israel. Same thing. So let's look spiritually at what happened in this little journey of a couple of months from the top of the Suez branch of the Red Sea down. Could we have a look at the map, Mallory? They are coming from the top of the Gulf of Suez. Right up at the top is where the crossing of the Red Sea took place. Now on the east side, that line that you see coming down, they are coming down, and the first place they come to is a place called Marah. Well, Marah was the first time they probably took a big stopping place of a few days. But when they arrived there, Exodus tells us, the water for all of these people and all of these livestock, the water that was available, there was plenty of water, but it was undrinkable. It was described as bitter or brackish. It wasn't something that you could drink. Of course, what was the response of the Israelites? Complaint. Why on earth would you bring us out of Egypt where at least we had water to drink? Can't you just hear it? So God puts them at this source of water for a camp. And he tells Moses to tell them, when Moses puts this branch, which God has told Moses which one to use, into that water, only then, when God says this water is going to become drinkable, will it become drinkable. And that is exactly what happened. So they faced difficulty, they complained, they wanted to go back to Egypt because they couldn't see any other way that their problem of having good water to drink could be solved. God shows them another way. So in this first instance on their journey, what basic lesson is God teaching them? He's using this incident to show them that He is the source of not only victories over Egyptian armies and parting of seas, but He is the source of everything that they have in their day-to-day life. Small point, but isn't it interesting that you can probably relate that it's a point that we all individually have to learn ourselves, not once, but over and over and over again. That process starts here at the place of the bitter well called Marah. Then they journey a little bit further along, and they realize they're running short of certain parts of their diet. They've got livestock with them. They've got some meat to eat. They've brought things out of Egypt as much as they could carry, but they're to a place where you can imagine that sort of stuff is starting to run out. They certainly have no resource for the very thing that is a basic of primitive diet during this period? Bread. So they're flat out of bread. They've got some meat, and they've gotten a re-up on their water at the spring where the bitter water was made sweet. So the Israelites are complaining again. Moses, at least when we were in Egypt, we were sitting with big loaves of bread around a big pot of meat, and here you have drug us all the way down here into the desert. And we don't, all we've got is, and they would probably specify what little bit of food they have readily available. And we don't have any bread, and we don't have any way to make any bread. We want to go back to Egypt because that's the only way we see that we are going to have bread. So there. Moses goes to God and says, what am I going to do with these people? It just doesn't seem that we can please them at all. They think that they've got to go back to Egypt in order to get a loaf of bread. God says, go down and tell them that from now on, while they're on this journey, every night when they wake up the next morning, the ground is going to be covered with bread. And that's exactly what happened. It was not bread like you and I think from the grocery store. It was called manna. Now, manna, as was figured out and as mentioned in the Bible in its particularities, consists of small white grains like the seeds of coriander. When you eat them, they have a mild sweet flavor like honey, and they furnish carbohydrates. There is some evidence that the Israelites, they could eat these seeds individually and gain nourishment and satisfaction for the need for carbohydrates from just eating it. There's one depiction where some of the Israelites were lazy and didn't even have to get up. They just held their hand outside the tent, and when they woke up, their hand was full of this substance, which all they had to do was draw their hand back inside the tent and eat it, and there they have it. There is other indications through scholarship that the Israelites also ground this substance, pounded it, and made a dough out of it, and sort of baked it and made a form of bread. The Bible doesn't speak directly to all of that. The basic point is that God furnished to them the answer for their needs. Now, what was accomplished during that? Remember the point of dependence with the bitter water? We now have a reiteration of that point. That when you came to the place where you desperately needed this, did you provide it for yourself? No. Who provided it for you? God. There's some indication, as scholarship has looked at this point, that we're not talking about little grains of things that they had to go and find out all among the sand and on the bushes and things. That manna wasn't just that. It was like a thick layer that all they had to do was scoop it up. But God is adding another dimension to his teaching of the Israelites in a simplistic way. Remember that with the manna, God adds another thing: rules and restrictions on what to do. And believe me, there are more to follow in other areas. But the idea of rules of behavior as conditions for God's provisions is starting to be primitively and elementarily late. So we have the manna is going to come basically every morning. But here are the rules very quickly. You are only to gather, the Bible says, about 1 omer of, which is about a little bowl, and an omer is about 4 pints, which is about a half a gallon. That'll give you a picture of how much the bowl that would hold a half a gallon in volume is how much per person you're to get. And you're to eat that all during the day. But you're not to try to hoard it and get a lot more. And the reason I'm going to show you that doesn't work is every night, all of it that you have not eaten because you gathered too much is going to rot and get worms, and it's not going to be edible. So don't gather more than this. A rule, an elementary rule. So God is now beginning to teach dependence and following rules and regulations in order to prosper. We have that repeated when they come to the place where they are out of water again, and God instructs Moses to take his staff and strike the rock, and the rock suddenly becomes a spring, and out gushes enough water for 1 to 2 million people and all of that livestock. Now we have another point of the same teaching power of God. They come to the place right before they get to Sinai, where they are attacked by the Amalekites. The Amalekites are the descendants of Esau. Remember, Esau is the twin brother of Jacob, the one who was denied his birthright of being chosen and favored through deception on the part of Jacob. So Esau's descendants have become the Amalekites, who now decide they live down in that area in the wilderness north of the Sinai, and here comes all of these people, and they don't like it, so they attack them. Well, at this point, the Israelites are sitting ducks in terms, they're stretched out over a huge long area, and they have no army. They have no real weapons other than some short swords and the kinds of things that you would use for multi-purposes. So Joshua emerges out of this emergency, and he forms a little volunteer army, untrained. There's no history, no military history with the Israelites. And he goes out to meet them, but they know that they have no way of becoming a fighting people because they've never done it before. So God reinforces this dependence and says, okay, remember how we did with the Red Sea? Moses got up above the sea and raised his staff, and the waters parted. We're going to do that again. We're going to show them that only God, operating through the people whom he's given authority, can accomplish these kinds of deliverances, not only against Egyptian forces and great armies, but against other small problems, but dangerous ones as they arise. So Moses gets on a hill, as God instructs, above the battle that is starting to be fought. And as he raises his staff, the Israelites are routing the Amalekites. But Moses gets tired. Moses is 80 years old. And as the battle starts going, the staff starts coming down and the Amalekites start winning. So finally, the ones around Moses hold Moses' arm up so that he can keep the staff up. A good illustration to the people that, look, we had a problem with the Amalekites, and who ultimately solved that? It had to be God, because remember, as long as we did what he said and the staff stayed up, we were winning. But when the staff started coming down because Moses got tired, we started losing. God makes his point again. That's spiritual. All of that is spiritual. He is also forming them into a functioning people as a nation. All we have at this point is 12 tribes, the descendants of the 12 sons of Jacob, who have been multiplying for 400 years. We don't have any organization even to settle disputes, even among the tribes or between the tribes or whatever. We've only got Moses as some sort of authority, and he is only very recent. So we have a very interesting thing that happens just before the Israelites get to Mount Sinai. Appears Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, who is a Midianite priest. The Midianite people are from the area around Mount Sinai. And you might question, well, who are the Midianites, and what kind of priest would they have? The Bible tells us all of that. The Midianites are descendants of Abraham's wife, Keturah, who he married after Sarah died. And one of his sons by Keturah was named Midian. So now his descendants have come down and are the Midianites. And they have some sort of belief in the God of Abraham. We know virtually nothing about it. But Jethro is very helpful. He's arrived on the scene and he tells Moses, Moses, look, you're working yourself to death. Everything anybody has to complain about among themselves, they bring it to you. My suggestion is that you give solemn, delegated authority to certain ones in each tribe so that they can adjudicate these sorts of things that's wearing you out, and then you only adjudicate the things that they can't resolve. Moses takes that to God, and that's exactly what they put into effect. So what has happened? What has happened here in the building of a nation? We now have the 12 tribes loosely connected being organized with authority within each of those tribes that has been delegated through Moses from God a nation is being formed. In these 40 years, a religion is being formed and a nation is being formed. Thank you.